Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Here we are. A whole nother week has gone past. Of course, with us today is Michael Bohuslav, and I'm Jacqui. Lovely to connect once more. So we are up to chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, and we're just going to launch straight in. Over to you, Michael, and welcome.
Oh, that was all very brief, Jacqui. Hello to you, and a very warm welcome to all of our listeners. I'd just like to start off, Jacqui, by letting everyone know that last week, in concluding chapter 2, I ran out of time to make a final point, which is a very important one, I feel, and so I'd like to make that now. And it can serve both as a bit of revision of chapter 2 that we finished, and also launch me into the chapter 3 of this great teaching that we're looking at, the Bhagavad Gita. So I'll just refer to my notes from last week. And the concluding 19 shlokas of chapter 2, the final topic of that chapter, describe the qualities of a sage, or a description of the illumined ones, or the great masters. And in essence, that means us that are seeking truth. These are the qualities that eventually we'll be operating from, or needing to operate from, to reach that final destination. But along the way, we're going to be doing it continuously, as we've discussed before, a continuous refining process of our being. So gradually, step by step, we'll be making changes, and it'll fit in with what I'm about to read here now. So I've quoted the actual verse from the Gita, where in verse 54, Arjuna asks, "My Lord, how can we recognize the saint who has attained pure intellect, who has reached the state of bliss, and whose mind is steady? How does he live? How does he talk? How does he act?" Arjuna naturally would like to know this, which is us, of course, Arjuna. We'd all like to know how we're supposed to be, what's the way we're going to live and act and talk and so on, so that he could understand more clearly what he was striving for in life. So I thought this was a useful passage that needed to be brought to everyone's attention. And then briefly, Krishna gives a detailed explanation, but I'll briefly summarize it here. He tells him that reveling in the bliss of the self, the enlightened one stays free from all of the egocentric desires and attachments. In that state of absolute fulfillment, all worldly enjoyments fall into insignificance. We still have them, but they don't have the same importance, Jacqui. We lower them down because trying to achieve and operate from our higher self becomes more important to us. So it's not as though we just give up on life or get rid of our houses or jobs or families. None of that. Just bring it, put it in its right perspective, if you like, is probably the best way to say it. So he says these worldly enjoyments start to fall into insignificance. He said he is like a river which has entered into the ocean, and having reached that supreme state, he has merged with eternity. And this is the last beautiful line, Jacqui. He says, "Dear friend, you too should strive to be such a person." So he's obviously talking to us, to Arjuna. Yeah? Dear friend, you too should strive to be in a state of bliss. Enjoy the world, but enjoy it in its proper perspective, and aim for your higher self, operating at all times. So they're lovely words.
It's beautiful. Again, I feel all warm and gooey all over just even hearing that. It's like it just brings the focus right into what we could all be, can all and should all be doing in life. That even if we're not concerned with being too academic about the study, or hell-bent on reaching self-realization, it's this lovely reminder: live to the
Yes.
very best of our ability, evolve
Yeah.
to the best we can, and we are well and truly on the right path. Beautiful words.
Yeah, well, they are beautiful words, and the whole teaching is beautiful. And the reason it's beautiful is because it's pure, it's truthful, and it's coming from the Lord himself. He's just teaching us and giving us instructions. Now, some of them, as we're going to go along, are a bit, they're going to be new to people, and so it's going to appear hard and whatever. But I'll always try and be as gentle as I can, and say it in a manner that hopefully everyone can relate to. But you can't avoid the actual teaching. That's what we're all on about. And even though it's brief and in snippets, I still feel obligated, if I'm going to be doing an expose or a summary of the Gita that these points have to be mentioned. So at this point, while I'm sort of still not quite launching into chapter 3, I'd just like to do a quick recap of chapters 1 and 2, and they are very brief. In chapter 1, Krishna, because I just wanted to emphasize half a dozen words that are going to be very relevant in chapter 3, and indeed throughout the entire teachings, and it's based on the first 2 chapters that we've already studied. So in chapter 1, Krishna urged Arjuna to act, the word act, like the great warrior which he was. In other words, he's saying we're great beings, we're great human beings, and we're greater than we, by and large, recognize. And because we identify with the lesser self, the body and the mind and the emotions, we don't identify enough with the higher self, which is the greatness of who we truly are. So we're limiting ourselves as a human being unless we make a change and switch into this, understand this new teaching and make changes in our life. He then urges him to fight. Fight's another important word, for his kingdom and for the welfare of his people. And he also reminded him it was his duty, another very important word, to fight for righteousness and truth. And then in chapter 2, he continued to urge him to fight, but this time it was a battle for his own soul. And this is what the rest of the teaching now is. We're fighting for our higher self to be more prominent and more active in our lives, calling the shots, if you like, and behind all of our decisions that we make. And to do that, he said, you need new knowledge. So the key words: act, fight, duty, new knowledge. We've stressed those over the 6 podcasts so far, and a very important lead into chapter 3, based on which is titled, as I said, the yoga, or I think I'm going to say now, the yoga of action. Just going to put a question to our listeners now, Jacqui, and I'm going to listen attentively because I can pick up on vibrations and all of that, as you know.
Of course.
And I'll be able to give an answer on what I'm picking up on when I've asked the question. So listeners, each week I've been reminding you to relate these teachings to your own spiritual journey, and to practice and observe any noticeable changes that are taking place within you. How's all that going? Oh, that's excellent.
Why am I feeling the strong urge to giggle?
Keep up the good work. You're doing well. Very, very, very good. I'm very happy. Is that good, Jacqui?
It's good. It's good.
You got to have a little bit of humour in all of these things, don't you? I always say to my students, this is very serious work we're doing, the study and the information and the knowledge and the changes. So that's all very serious. But I say we don't have to go around long-faced and wearing sackcloth and ash and, it's just very serious. So it is serious, listeners, very serious. But we need to approach it, in a manner that's acceptable to us. Otherwise, it can start becoming too overpowering and, like it's being forced and all of that, and you achieve nothing. So my constant reminder to you is all just stay as open as you can to these podcasts, listen attentively as you can, and just let the power of the truth do its work. All right?
Lovely. A light-hearted approach.
I think that's it, Jacqui. That's the words exactly. So with chapter 3 titled Yoga, the path of action, so yoga meaning path, and there's 3 main paths, just quickly here. The path of yoga action, there's the path of knowledge, and there's the path of devotion. And we'll cover all those 3 in separate chapters. They're all very important. They're like 3 little rivers coming together into one river and becoming a powerful river that's got knowledge, devotion, and action all encompassed, which is basically how we live. We just haven't got all of those rivers coming in, joining in at this stage. So this whole chapter, and it's only chapter 3, so very early in the piece, Krishna is teaching Arjuna, us, really rightful action as against unrightful action is, I guess, a very brief summary. So he begins his teachings more earnestly now, and in a manner that the development of thought from this point on will be gradual, precise, and methodical. So it's a step-by-step process now from the remaining 16 shlokas, 16 chapters, I should say. So I'm going to read out some material which is from Krishna's teaching, and it's a bit, as I say, on the more difficult, but not impossible by any means. But just to make it an easier entry in, we're simply going to be looking at what's called rightful action as against unrightful action, truthful action or untruthful action, the difference between right and wrong. And today I see a lot of confusion in society. Everyone says, well, my truth's the same as your truth, or that there's almost no difference between right and wrong, or good or bad, or whatever. Well, it's a nonsensical sort of notion. Even intellectually, that doesn't make sense, but certainly not in accordance with the teachings of the great masters, Jacqui, that spell out clearly that there is a distinction between truthful, rightful action and untruthful and unrightful action. And this is what the material will now cover. So once again, we find Arjuna in a state of utter confusion. He's querying Krishna why at first he recommended action and told him to fight in the early parts of the teaching, remember, on the battlefield. And now he's been telling him he needs knowledge. So in the last part of chapter 2, he was stressing knowledge, wasn't he, all through chapter 2, after he finished telling. So he's confused, and rightly so, I suppose. You would be. One minute someone's telling you a lot of action, and the next minute they're telling you a lot of knowledge. But as I said earlier, just a few minutes ago, both are important. But he's just going to zero in now where Arjuna is at this stage of his life and his nature and personality, and he realizes that being a man of action, a warrior, he needs to understand action. And so that's why he's going. So Arjuna says, tell me clearly, which is superior, action or knowledge, so I know which path to reach perfection. So he's asking the right questions. He's wanting to sort out for himself so he can understand clearly which way he needs to go. And at this stage, Krishna was realizing what he needs at the moment is knowledge, knowledge about right action. So it's sort of like, it's a bit of both. So anyway, Krishna now introduces the idea of action to Arjuna, telling him that human beings fall under two broad classifications. And these are, one, introverts. He says these are contemplative beings, people who are a bit more still, and they're following the path of knowledge, which is really most of the people now that are tuning into these podcasts to some degree or other. And the others are extroverts. They're naturally inclined to action. They take up the path of action. So basically, Jacqui, most people on the earth are active and operating from action, and only a very few turn to contemplative, meditative, introspection, these sorts of things, and seek new knowledge to make changes in their lives. Now, there's no good or bad in any of this, and I'll explain this in the next few lines. So it's important to remember that actions aren't firstly just physical. Most people think when you say actions are playing sport or mowing the lawns or washing your car or vacuuming the house or something like that. But in actual fact, most of the activity, if you look at it closely, Jacqui, most action takes place in people's minds and in their emotional aspects. All of the thinking, all of the mind always whirling around, fully active, thinking this, thinking that, organising this, planning this, all that. And in the heart, 1 minute you're happy, 1 minute we're crying, 1 minute we're angry, next minute everything's okay. So constant movement in the hearts and in the emotions, as well as, of course, in the, and that reflects then in the actions, the physical actions of the being. A lot of people, don't quite grasp that significance, that actions are more in every person mentally and emotionally than they are physical. So it says, note also that our society today, we tend to view these two words quite differently. introverts and extroverts. Introverts, we think, oh, they're the little wallflower on the, on the wall or something like that. Extroverts are out there pushing themselves and saying how great they are. Well, that's a definition in a sense that's appropriate and accurate, but he's meaning them here in a totally different way. He's talking about whether we've woken up and are starting to seek truth, so that's that introvert looking within, as against extroverts that are constantly looking out there and dealing with worldly issues. Is that clear, Jacqui?
That's very clear.
Yeah, okay.
And I think even if people haven't had a lot of exposure to this kind of language, people are aware of it once it's pointed out in the way you've just described. I'm just thinking, for years I've done corporate work where I've taught mindfulness and meditation seminars, and most of the time the questions that have come over many, many years are all to do with how to quieten the mind, how to be able to get to sleep because the mind is so restless and so active, how to be able to fall back asleep in the middle of the night when the activity of the mind wakes you up. So once people's attention is drawn to the fact that that's an extroverted or very high levels of activity, I think people relate to that at a personal level very much.
Yeah. Yeah, well, these are the people that are listening to these podcasts, Jacqui. I know that's anyone that's not interested is not listening. So all those people, sort of people that you're referring to, and there are many, and I sense that there's a change shifting to more people wanting to understand themselves, one way or another. So I'll continue on, Jacqui. Thus Arjuna, being a kshatriya, a warrior, a man of action, means that his own nature and personality compel him to act. Hence his confusion about being told to pursue knowledge. Notice the reference there to his nature and his personality. So we've all got individual natures and personalities, and it's these that drive every individual to be doing what they're doing. So when you observe around the world, you start to get a sense, this notion that we started off in the first podcast, know thyself. Well, the more we know ourselves, the more we know every other human being on the planet. Why they're saying what they're saying, why they're doing what they're doing, why they're thinking what they're thinking. All of these things, we don't know exactly, but we know where they're coming from. And it's a simple equation. They're either coming from the truth and from truthful knowledge, or they're coming from untruth. And one's egoic and one's our higher self, Buddhi, as I refer to it. So he goes, so Krishna now clearly explains this twofold path, which leads the human race to spiritual enlightenment. So twofold, and then path is singular. So it's sort of like a bit of a paradox, but I'll go on to explain it here. So he says the spiritual path is one. There's only one path, the path of truth. It can be, there's many messengers, but there's only one message, is the saying. So the twofold refers to the earlier and the latter stages of the same path. So these introverts and extroverts, people who haven't accessed any of this knowledge or very limited, tend to be extroverts, and they're at earlier stages of what's called our spiritual journey. So even people who haven't woken up, which is the most of the people on the planet, are in actual fact on a spiritual path in the sense of the true meaning of it. But they're just going through lifetimes before they're ready to wake up to start looking more clearly at what that path or spiritual path actually is. So the introverts, the quieter ones, people who have started to meditate or doing yoga or wanting to meditate or wanting to access this knowledge, like all of our listeners, and I know many have got a higher understanding. Well, you all fall into this category of being introverts. You're more interested in what's inside me rather than what's outside me. Because we know, Jacqui, don't we, that, and I'm sure nearly all the people listening to some extent or other know, that there's something very special inside. Yeah, it's called our soul, our divine aspect. So he says, he tells Arjuna there's a path of knowledge or wisdom for those who meditate, are still, and that is the extroverts, as I've just said, and a path of action for those who work, who are fully engaged with worldly affairs, and that is their extroverts. So one's looking more inside, still involved in the world, but the other one's looking predominantly outside and not very much, if anything at all, inside. So that's the clear distinction here of extroverts and introverts. Simply put, all the people in the world may be broadly classified under these categories. And the active, I'll introduce another little word here, the active who have many desires. So we need to understand what it is that's forcing us to act, and we'll explain about that we're compelled to act. It's desires. It's desires. So, and I'll be mentioning a little bit here, but also a lot more in the second podcast. It's a very big aspect of this aspect of action as to what's behind it all. And many people are not really aware as to how significant this word desires is. So the active who are out there in the world, they've got many desires. They're chasing wealth and fame and, jobs and, whatever we have in life, raising their children. Nothing wrong with any of that, but that's where their emphasis and their energy all is directed at. The contemplative, they have a lot less desires. They've learned about desires and they're wanting to eliminate more and more. And I have lots of students over the years wanting to say, well, yeah, I can understand letting go my bad desires, but I'd like to keep my good desires. And I explain, well, you can't have a high and a low. They both go together. And anyway, eventually we do come to understand that the idea in the end is no desires, but I'll explain all that as we go along in this podcast and the next podcast in particular. So he says that. So I go on to say that the more, well, I'm only rephrasing what Krishna is saying. The more desires a person has, the more active he will be. You're just compelled to chase all, and there's this. Desires are likened to what's called the hydra, a 10-headed hydra. You chop off one head and it instantly grows another. So we achieve a desire, and then as soon as the gloss is worn off, we start looking instantly for another desire. They're inexhaustible. They just keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. Where was I up to? So the desires drive, the more desires a person has, the more active he will be. The active are at earlier stages of their spiritual journey, which I've already touched on, whilst the contemplative are further advanced. So less desires means you've got more chance to spend looking in within as against focusing on outside. So this is where we are, Jacqui. We're switching from one to the other. We're making a choice. All the listeners, and you and me included, of course, we're starting to understand, or have started quite to a larger extent, understand that we don't want to operate the way we have been, and we've made a choice, and we made that earlier. That was one of the exercises. Have you decided you want to fight for changes in your life, this crossroad that you find yourself at? And everyone told me, I picked up on that again telepathetically through the vibration, Jacqui, and they all said, yes, we want to change, we want to fight, we want to do our duty. So that's all beautiful. So anything you'd like to add in there, Jacqui?
Yes. Well, I'm just wondering, I mean, partly I'm wondering this for myself, but I suppose I'm also attuned to, my student base or the people that I'm bringing on this journey. And I'm thinking that a few sort of points might be coming to mind for people. I'm wondering, because I'm assuming too that a lot of people will be quite happy with the parts of their lives. It's not like we all need necessarily a complete and utter overhaul, although you may think differently. But a lot of people might be thinking, no, there's a large portion of my life going pretty well. There's just some refinements, some tweaks, some areas I'd like to grow or change or refine. So I suppose just even stating that in and of itself seems important. I'm wondering if there's a difference between what feels for people like a deeper aspiration rather than perhaps desires that could possibly be a little more surface level. So I'm interested in your perspective on that. Like, for instance, sometimes in life we do hold a deep burning aspiration to move in a certain direction or to make a contribution, or I'm just wondering if your view of even that wording, if there's something you'd like to add to that, whether desires are perhaps more for superficial things. What would you add on that note?
Well, firstly, I'd say, deep aspirations. I'd have to, get an understanding of what that means. But I think I'm picking up, as against desires that I'm sort of dismissing more or less. And your question's sort of twofold, so I'll join the two together. The first part you're asking, a lot of people that and I know, and a lot of people in society that I'm aware of, are operating to a large extent from their higher self and from truth. They mightn't be tuning into these podcasts, and they mightn't have the actual knowledge, but somewhere along the way in their lifetimes, not just this one, they've accumulated one way or another the truth and rightful actions and rightful living of their own accord, because we've all got that ability within. These words are just trying to bring out what's already in everyone. So yes, the first point you made is very valid. I'm not suggesting to all the listeners that you've been total nincompoops and whatever, and now you're starting something new. The fact that you even got the fact that you've got to this stage, and I mentioned that the jackpot of life, is a result of lots of work you've done, the people have done, Jacqui, we've all done in previous lifetimes. So you got to remember that we're looking at continuous life cycles in this, which we haven't touched on much, but I've mentioned them, and they're a very important part of the teaching. So there are many people on the planet. Every action that people are making that's truthful and right, even according to our legal laws, but they're also aligning with divine laws. So they're all doing what they're supposed to be doing. This teaching, for example, is for those who are getting more fair income, if I can put it that way, and wanting to really zero in on all the nitty-gritty, all as much knowledge and information, so we can make the changes more consciously according to knowledge we've got, and a desire to improve who we are for our own benefit, and then also for the benefit of our family and friends, and in fact all of society. Now, the other point you raised was about aspirations. Now, I take that, if I'm understanding correctly, meaning a higher ideal, high aspirations. Now, Hitler had a high ideal, and he thought he was the rightful ruler for all the world, and he also had a rightful ideal in his mind that eliminating a whole race of people was going to be a high ideal for him. But here's the crazy idea of a high ideal. The highest ideal for any human being is to have self-realization. Well, I think you used the word aspirations, didn't you? Yeah. So if all our listeners are aspiring to self-realization at the end, that's the highest aspiration any human being can have. But along the way, you've already mentioned it again today, and you've mentioned it a number of times. As we make a conscious effort to improve ourselves and operate more from the truth, well, we're aspiring in that sense to constantly be improving ourselves. So people who aspire for world peace, or people who aspire to, for society to be more just and more fair, they're all very worthwhile aspirations. So does that sort of...
It's beautiful. Yeah, I just was feeling like we needed it to tease that out a little bit and have some more context, and you've certainly provided that. So that's lovely.
Well, that's your job, and you're doing it beautifully, Jacqui. Because when you brought it to my attention, I'm realising, well, I'm sort of just making a lot of assumptions here and sort of frolicking on, but it's a very pertinent question you put, and I'm glad you put it, and I'm sure a lot of listeners will be glad of this little bit of conversation we've just had, and so I'd just like to finish this little segment on about the first bit I want to say about desires, and as I said, I'll make a lot more reference to it in the second podcast of this same chapter, chapter 3. So I'm saying here that it's important we begin looking more closely at desires, what they are. So I say, for example, how many desires have we got? If we start looking in there, you'll start seeing there's hundreds, thousands. And as soon as you achieve the 100 or 1,000, another 100 or 1,000 will appear. So it's a big thing. How far-reaching and widespread they are. They're behind all our emotions. They're behind all our thoughts. They're behind all our actions. So they're everywhere, these desires. But they don't jump out at you and say, here I am, I'm a desire, I'm a desire. So the next reference is to how cunningly our ego can conceal these desires. And ego is not our friend. Ego is our enemy, the internal enemy that we've got to be, that we're combating. This is the fight, Jacqui, that we talked about early in the piece. The fight between the higher self, the buddhi, and the fight between the lower self, the ego, the egoic part of a being. And also how continuously they dictate every thought, word, or action we perform every minute of every day of our lives. Right from when we're born, desires kick in. And they just keep on playing out until the day we die. We can't do anything, I've mentioned already in another podcast. We can't do anything about the ones that are set in concrete, like I mentioned the USB stick last week, our computer program that we've programmed ourselves with and we bring into this lifetime. But what we can do is make significant changes as to how we react to when those desires are playing out. That's the critical part for the people now and for the remaining years of your life where the focus will need to be. So, and next week I'll elaborate on this more fully because it fits in with Krishna's teachings in the second half of the chapter. Now, in brief brushstrokes, we're sort of starting to get pretty close to knock off time, Jacqui. So I'll have to even what would I say? Summarize my summary.
Why am I feeling like that's dangerous territory?
Well, I'm just looking at a page and I'm thinking, well, I might not even read this page, but they're all important. So anyway, I've got in broad, brief brushstrokes, I'll now outline Krishna's intellectual appeal to Arjuna on how to act in life. So he's appealing to him intellectually, and later on he appeals to him emotionally. So he's getting at where we all do to all people. If you're helping someone, in inverted commas, it's either mental or it's emotional, isn't it? Yeah. So he's doing the same at this stage. A number of things he talks about. He said, I'll just read these three because these 3 points are important. He explains how all of our activities consist of 3 steps. Firstly, he says we receive external stimuli from outside the world, from something in the world. And secondly, once senses or sight, hearing or whatever brings something in, we then process this information internally with our mind and our emotions. And usually a combination of both through our individual personality or nature, which I mentioned last week on it, is our USB stick. So that's the second response, doing something internal with what's come in from outside. And then the third response is we respond back to the world, either via what we're thinking, which most people might not recognize, but energy-wise, it goes out into the world. But more clearly, we put the response back out verbally with our words and through our actions. So he says this process keeps repeating continuously throughout our lives. So if you have a moment, be observing that something comes in, activity takes place inside, and then there's a response goes back out. All right, and that's you finish one lot of stuff coming in, next minute another bit comes in, or next second, next hour, it doesn't matter, but it's a continuous cycle. He says this process keeps repeating continuously throughout our lives. He tells him that no one can remain inactive. You must act. This is important because this is action we're talking about. So you can't say, oh, I'm not going to act. No, you have to act. Your nature will make you act, and your nature is driven by your desires. So you will act. The qualities, he says, your personality in conjunction with the qualities of nature will compel you or force you to act. These qualities in the creation, and we don't know them really as such in the English language, Jacqui, but in Sanskrit or in the teachings of the Gita, they're called the three gunas. And gunas means universal energies. And they're, in quick terms, they're known as sattva, rajas, and tamas. There'll be a chapter on that later on, and we'll elaborate more fully there. I haven't got time to do that now. But understanding a bigger picture that there's the universal forces are operating as well as our own individual forces. And then he further advises Arjuna to start taking greater control of his senses. Remember the 5 horses that were on that picture I showed at the start of the chariot with the reins? Well, the 5 horses are representing the 5 senses. And he's saying, the reins, take greater control. He says, keep practicing karma yoga, the path of right action, and performing your duty according to your nature. And he's stressing there, don't try and do what's not natural to you. Sometimes we, for example, a quick example, people think, oh, I'd like to do that job because it's a high-paying job, but it's not suited to their nature. So they might get the job and the money sort of rolling in, but they're unhappy at work, and eventually it doesn't work out. So there's a need to understand, look at your own nature and act accordingly in your own nature. Krishna, now this next little point's fairly important, Jacqui. Krishna introduces Arjuna to the concept of sacrificial action, known in Sanskrit sacrifice as yajna, sacrificial action. Now that sort of puts the heebie-jeebies up in a lot of people, I've found over the years. When we start, I don't introduce it in my first session of a class or whatever. But it's nowhere near as the reason it throws people a bit is, well, it's a difficult concept to accept in our society because we don't use that word very much, and most people's connotation or understanding of it is we tend to associate the word with pain or hardship. We'll have to give up something, we'll miss out, we'll be worse off, and so on. So there's this sort of fear of pain and suffering. I'm making a sacrifice, poor me, all this sort of stuff. Modern society revolves around people claiming their rights on taking from society. What's in it for me approach. An age of enlightenment we've been known to be referred to as this world, an age of enlightenment. People saying, oh, the world owes me a living. Do you understand that a lot of that's existing in society?
Entitlement, I think you mean.
Yeah, entitlement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, did I say? What did
Enlightenment came to the fore.
I've got entitlement written. Yeah, thank you. Not enlightenment. No, opposite, entitlement. And so the next word is opposite. The total opposite is the case with yajna. It's nothing like what I've just outlined. This is action performed according to divine law, sacrificial yajna, sacrificial action. It's action for the benefit and the welfare of yourself and the entire human race. So there's a huge difference, isn't there, Jacqui, between how we perceive, by and large, most people, what sacrifice means and what it actually means in truth. The critical behind all of this is our motive or our desire behind our actions. So it's the motive of what, and that's driven by your desires. So the two go together. It's your attitude, your motive as to what you're thinking, what you're saying, what you're doing. And these are all very important things we need to learn and understand. If it's desire-based motives or the attachment to the action and its outcome or fruit, the act will be limited and the end result won't be pure. But if, on the other hand, the action is performed truly in the now with no egoic mental or emotional attachments, the result will be beneficial to the individual and to all concerned. So there's a big difference between the two. Subtle it might be, but nevertheless very, very significant and needs to be understood. And now Krishna, I'll go on to quickly, he refers to Arjuna saying that the Lord himself brings about this entire creation. We're looking at a real big picture now, Jacqui, through sacrifice, through yajna. Yeah? He sacrifices his own self and his own intelligence and power and energy into the creation, and then keeps it going during the course of the creation, of which we're part of. So that consciousness is operating within us. And the sacrifice is continuous. It just keeps on going, keeps on going. There's no limit to it. And it's pure, and it's pure love. It's pure truth. A lot of ways of describing it. So he's saying that all of it comes, all this whole creation comes through the sacrifice from the Lord himself, through his own sacrifice. And yeah, this will be elaborated more fully over the coming remaining 16 chapters. I haven't got time to go into it now. So he says, if a lovely line, if we only take from the society, from the creation as human beings, individuals, and lots of greedy people out there, and all they want is fame or money or this or that or whatever, and don't really give too much back, or if anything, he says, verily, verily, you are a thief. This is the Lord saying to human beings. So he's saying you've also got to perform from a sacrificial point of view, in the sense of meeting the need, acting from truth, and in that way you are using the sacrifice of the Lord, and you are using your sacrifice to carry out your duties or your life work. Is that? As I say, I'm having to cut to the chase a bit here, Jacqui.
We are having to cut to the chase. Yeah. I'm going to give you a wrap up 30 seconds, knowing that you'll probably exceed that into a minute. But just one quick thought there. I know from teaching classes and retreats and workshops, people occasionally will hear something like that, and so beautifully said, I must add. But people sometimes hear that, and I think they worry and think that they have to make some contribution that is enormous, to the world. And I often have conversations with people that if we all just took responsibility and did our own little bit, and we sometimes see beautiful movements, like in Melbourne, where there's streets where people live and they just come and go and don't know their neighbours. There's even simple movements around little street gatherings, get to know your neighbours, have a neighbourhood feel. So I think it's worth perhaps just pointing out that actually sometimes our very best way of contributing is the local immediate things that we can do in our own life, where we see a need, even if we perceive it as small. Do that thing. I'm guessing that falls into your description of sacrifice. It doesn't have to be this huge thing that we put out there into the middle of the world. What's local and immediate is often the most beautiful starting point, and possibly all that's required.
Totally, Jacqui. You hardly need for me to say anything, but I will. Anyone that's got any notion that's listening of doing something phenomenal and rescuing the world or saving the world, well, I'd simply say to you, forget it, mate, forget it. The first thing people need to understand, Jacqui, is your responsibility to saving anything or anyone or whatever is yourself. Yeah, save yourself. In other words, get your own self fixed up. That's the best contribution you can make to anything in the creation. In other words, realize who you are. Secondly, Jacqui, we've been saying all the way along, it's all a step-by-step process. Most people will only be able to contribute to the well-being of society, and there's reference here to the wheels of the creation, which I haven't got time now to go into, but you play your role. If everyone could play their role, it would be a totally, and meaning operate from their, as best as they can, from their higher self, instead of from their egoic aspect. This world would be a totally different looking world, Jacqui. And if you can just be nicer to the people next to you, smile at the lady at the supermarket or something, actually listen to someone when they're saying something, instead of just watching when their lips stop moving so you can get in and say what you want to say. All of those are very, very simple things. And they're all based on what I'm describing. It's all part of sacrificial action. No one goes around saying, oh, I've just done a sacrificial action. I invited my neighbour in for a cup of coffee. But that you've done that, if that's what you've done. So your comments were spot on, Jackie. They're very accurate. And as I say, I tend to maybe lean more big picture and, don't sort of make it more user friendly, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here. And that's your job, yeah. My job's to prattle on, and your job's to sort of.
Well, I think between the two of us, we're doing pretty well. Now, we really are at that pointy end of the time. Do you have some concluding comments, and could we wrap that into 30 seconds or so?
Yeah, well, I haven't got time to do any concluding comments. We've sort of pretty much done that now. But I'd just like to leave the listeners with an exercise. You know how you've asked me to do an exercise each week. So your exercise this week, listeners, is to observe whenever you remember whether your actions, either physical, mental or emotional, don't forget mental and emotional, are motivated by your higher self, your buddhi, or whether they're motivated by your lower self, your ego. Now, that shouldn't be too difficult, really. So whenever you remember, just even a thought. Was that my higher self thinking that thought, or my lower self? What I've just said to someone, or after the conversation, was that coming from my higher self, or was it coming from my lower self? What was my motive? What was my intention behind that? So, yeah, have a practice of that, everyone. And I'll ask maybe next week or the week after how you're going and pick up on the response. All right,
Beautiful.
listeners, I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you,
so much,
Jackie.
everybody. My pleasure. Thanks again for lots of lovely teachings. Plenty there for people to contemplate. All right, everybody, we'll leave it there. Thank you, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.